Hello, and welcome to This American Girl Reads. My name is Kirsten, and today I want to talk a little bit about how I develop my doll's stories and what are some things that you might use, what are some tools and prompts that you might use to develop your doll's stories as well. So I wanted to first start by saying that there's some things about me that you should probably understand before I dive into how I develop my doll's stories, just because it provides some context that I think is useful. I think sometimes people beat themselves up a little bit for not being people who develop doll stories or for whom it doesn't come naturally. And I don't think that's a useful thing to do. I think that, everybody's going to approach their dolls and their collection differently. And if doll stories is not something that you are naturally gravitating towards, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no requirement out there that you have a story for all your dolls, okay? But I do have stories for my dolls, I think for really two reasons. The first being that the era of American Girl that I grew up with was very heavily focused on stories and was very heavily focused on being able to tell a story about a girl in a particular moment of time. So, when the American Girl of Today line started, it wasn't, just to be like, oh, here's your mini-me, per se. It was never meant to necessarily be that, but it was about, you're a part of history too, and you should tell those stories. And so that's the kind of era that I grew up with. And so when I think about American Girl and I think about American Girl dolls, I am immediately thinking about stories and what kind of stories they are telling. The other reason that I come up with doll stories is that I have always been a writer. I went to Latchkey when I was a kid, which I now know as an adult, it was just daycare, but we called it Latchkey, even though that's not what latchkeying is. But I went to Latchkey, which was before and after school care, and my latchkey had different stations that you would get to go to, and you could ask to go to different stations to play with the different toys. And I would play with the dinosaur toys, and I would play with the My Little Pony toys, and I would play, I don't know if they had Barbies. I don't recall playing with Barbies. I did not play with the baby dolls. I was not interested in baby dolls. But the station that I ended up always gravitating towards the most was just the coloring section, because they had these big, just blank pieces of paper. And I would sit there and I would write a story and I would add pictures to it. And so I've been doing that kind of my entire life. When I got old enough to really start writing things down in a real way, I did. My school had something called a Young Authors program when I was in elementary school. And so every year, everybody in the school would write their own 20, 30-page book about, the kindergartners had to write an alphabet book. As you got older, you got to kind of choose your own topics. And then as I got older, I'm a fanfic writer. I have written a published piece in a book. So writing is just something I do. Telling stories is something I do. It's kind of a core part of who I am. And so when I started collecting American Girl again, it was kind of natural for me to gravitate towards the stories, which is why when I got back into American Girl, I started with collecting historicals because they had stories. And that was what was important to me, was the stories. So how I got started with creating stories was kind of a twofold thing that came together. The first thing that happened was The World by Us line came out. And I really, really liked The World by Us line. I thought it was a really interesting way to engage and tell some modern stories with a different kind of focus. And I thought that was really cool. And at the same time, that the time that I was kind of beginning to look beyond just the historicals, people were talking about the next Girl of the Year. I don't know which one it was at this point. I have to imagine it was Covey who was about to come out, because based on the timing of my doll collection and when I added all these different dolls, I have to imagine it was Covey who was about to come out. But there was lots of talk about, the upcoming Girl of the Year. Here's what she's rumored to be, what her hobbies are. And there was lots of AGIG posts and AGTube videos about people saying if I was in charge of designing a Girl of the Year, here's what I would do. And those two kind of factors at the same time combined for me to go, oh, you know what? I like dolls with stories. I could create my own stories. I have no idea why it took me this long to put those pieces together, but they did finally coalesce and come together, which is when I got, let's see, let me grab them real quick. Miri here, who, I'll talk a little bit about her in a second. I got Miri, she was my first CYO, but even before I got Miri, I got Carnes. So Carnes came out with the new Truly Me releases, and at the same time that I was like, oh, I could probably come up with my own stories, this little adorable girl came out, and I knew I wanted her. I really liked her wig, I liked her face, I thought she looked really cute, and I wanted to do something for her. And so I was like, okay, let me combine the two thoughts. You know, World by Us, they're not really doing anything more with. So I want to do something kind of World by Us-ish with a doll that I want to buy. And everybody's now talking about, you know, if they could design a Girl of the Year, what would they do? And those two things combined gave me the stories for Carnes and Miri. So Carnes is my chronic illness girly. She has an autoimmune condition that causes chronic pain and chronic illness. She loves paleontology. She's super into dinosaurs. And those are things that I'm like, American Girl is never going to do a girl who's obsessed with dinosaurs. That's not going to be a thing that they dive into. That's probably not going to be a high-selling collection. So I wanted to make a girl who had a hobby that American Girl is never going to explore in the Girl of the Year line, with some representation that I thought would be appropriate to fit into the World by Us kind of concept. So that was how I came up with Carnes' story. And then Miri, she was my first CYO, and I designed her specifically. She is my stage manager doll. Covey was coming out. We were finally getting a theater Girl of the Year. But I do tech theater, and I love tech theater, and there's no way in hell that they're ever gonna do a tech theater doll. Like, I think that would be awesome, but I don't think a lot of people would be super invested in that. And so I wanted a doll that did stage management, and so Miri was developed. She is Korean and Jewish, and she is a stage manager, and she also plays D&D. Those are kind of her big hobbies, because, again, probably never gonna get a Dolly D&D set. So that's kind of how I got started with the concept of developing doll stories. When it comes to coming up with a story for a doll, I actually think those are some really good places to start. Like, what are your hobbies? What are your interests that maybe American Girl isn't addressing? Or maybe they are. Like, maybe you want to start, like, maybe you're a dancer and you want to have a doll that really more reflects your experiences with dance. Maybe you don't connect with some of the other dolls that they've done that have had a dance hobby. So that's a really good place to get started. Some other good places that I think you can get started are actually, American Girl has provided some tools over the years that could be helpful to you. So the first is this All About Us book that they're including. I believe they're still including it with all the Truly Me dolls, the current run. I haven't bought a new Truly Me in a little while, so it's possible that they've changed that, but I feel like I would have heard about that. But yeah, this book is actually a really good tool to just start lightly exploring the concept of developing a doll personality or a doll story. There's lots of things in here. It's really designed to be like filled out by the child who owns the doll. And then there's some things that are like, oh, and what does your doll think? But I think you could absolutely go through this entire thing and do all of the quizzes and all of like these things about like birthdays and stuff and figure it out based on your doll. So, this schooled in style, trace your way through this flowchart and find your perfect back to class outfit. Yes, you could absolutely take this as you. There's nothing wrong with that. I would enjoy finding out if I'm comfy, cute, fancy first day or pattern party. I'm going to tell you right now it's comfy, cute, and not even cute, just comfy. But you could definitely go through and answer these questions based on how you want your doll to respond to help you like start getting a sense of what is your doll's fashion style. You can read all these descriptions of the zodiac signs and say, you can pick a doll's birthday and zodiac sign based off of the description. You don't have to necessarily start with a date and then figure out which one that falls under. You could be like, you know what? I really love the idea of a Libra. Like, the description of a Libra to me sounds really good. So I'm going to fit my doll's birthday between September 23rd and October 22nd. Like, that is a thing that you can absolutely do. So that is one really good tool that they've created that can just be like an occasional drop-in fun, doesn't require a lot of time or effort or deep thought. It's just like light trivia kind of things for your dolls that you could use to develop into a story. So that's one tool. Unsurprisingly, though, my favorite tool came out at the time when I was growing up, and that's these original books that would come with your American Girl of today if you got one. So I had these for my doll when I was growing up. I wrote 2 of them. I sadly do not have them anymore, probably for the best. 7-year-old Kirsten had lots of big ideas, but not a really good sense of how to structure a story. But what's really neat about these is that they follow the 6-book structure of the original American Girl historical series, right? Because again, the idea was see yourself in history. You know, you are like Felicity, you are like Kirsten, you are like Addie. You have these stories to tell too. And so they had this little book, and you would fill, like, here's where you could put the portraits of your family and friends, just like the original 6 books. And then it was just blank. You could write a little story in it. But what was extra cool was that each book came with this how to write guide, how to write an American Girl story. And I'm not going to show this one because this actually has, I got this on eBay, and this actually has some of the original owners' stuff in here, and I don't know where they are in the world, but I don't want to put their stuff out there. So let me grab the Learns a Lesson one. So yeah, here's the Learns a Lesson one. And when you open it up, it walks you through this process. Like, the first thing that you should be thinking about when you're telling a story is, what is your character's problem? And in the case of the Learn the Lesson books, and what will your character learn? And then just kind of walks you through like an example from the books, from the historical books, of like what that kind of looks like. And then you have a place here to write like, the main problem my character has is blank. And then, because this is a Learn the Lesson story, it says, describe the 2 lessons your American Girl will learn. What school lesson will she learn? And what lesson will she learn about herself or the world? This is also like really good if you're like, you're kind of like trying to see what the thematic connection is between all the different historical girls that got the 6-book series. There you go. It's the school lesson and what she will learn about herself or her world. And then it says, you're going to introduce new characters in a school story. Like, what is their name? What do they look and act like? How does your character know them? Draw a picture of a classroom. And then it kind of walks you through like an outline of actually writing a story. And I assume a lot of people probably don't necessarily want to like literally sit down and write a story, like a book. But if you did, and you weren't super familiar with writing concepts and how to structure a story, this is a really great guide. And so all 6 of those original books, original blank books, came with those guides to walk you through like, what are the themes that you should be addressing and exploring in this story. And, here's how to structure a story like this. And I still think, even if you're not someone who's going to sit down and like write a little book about each of your dolls, I know I haven't, and I am someone who does do a lot of writing. So I still think it's a really useful tool though, because it's like walking you through like, okay, now we're going to think about what is a central problem for your character. Who are their friends? What does their school look like? What does their holiday look like? How are they going to have an adventure where they save the day? Like, these are questions that you can ask yourself about a character, regardless of if you're going to write anything down, so that you can develop a story and a world around your character to make your doll feel more real and feel more fleshed out. So those are the tools American Girl gives you. When it comes to developing stories for your dolls, though, I also think it's really handy to think about what American Girl isn't giving you. So we talked a little bit about how one of the things that you can use as a jump off point is like, if you could create a girl of the year, what would you do? Like, what are the things that maybe American Girl hasn't done or hasn't done the way that you like that you would do to create a doll? Because that's functionally what a lot of these characters are, is just like your own personal girl of the year. But I think it's also good to, like, when you're thinking about what kind of collection you have and what kind of stories you want to tell, consider what are the stories you would want to tell if you got control of the company for, a year. What kind of books would you be hiring people to write or writing yourself? That's a really good place to start with. What kind of doll story do you want one of your dolls to have? Who do you wish was represented? We've seen a little bit more disability representation in recent years with, not necessarily super well done disability representation always, and not necessarily like said on the page very clearly that this character has a disability, but we have seen a little bit more, but we haven't seen a lot. Maybe you want to see a character with a disability and how that is explored in a story and how it impacts their life and how it just doesn't impact their life. Their central conflict doesn't have to be about disability. What are the things that you would love to see? Like, we haven't had a Muslim Girl of the Year. We haven't had any like specifically Muslim characters. Maybe that's something that you want to explore. This is something that I think about because, again, the part of the era of American Girl that I grew up with, and so I really strongly connect with, is that these are 9 to 12-year-old girls. And I do approach my storytelling as though I had control of the company for a year and could do whatever I wanted. And so I think about, like, what kind of role models would I want to put out there for girls? And you don't have to have, maybe you want to tell a story about someone who's really not a role model. Maybe you want to explore somebody who's really struggling. Not all your dolls have to be perfect. They don't have to have personalities that make them into goody little two-shoes. It's just something that I think about. It's why the kind of hobbies that I give my dolls is probably not reflective of modern girlhood. I'm not going to have a doll have a hobby of skincare. That's just not going to be a thing that I'm ever going to give a doll as a hobby, because I personally am a little weirded out by skincare as a hobby for, 8-year-olds. Raise your kids however you want. Like, it's not my business. I don't have kids, but that is not something that I want to tell a story about. And so I don't. And so my girls have much more grounded kind of hobbies, because that's the kind of story that I want to tell. That's the kind of story I want to put out there when I think about, talking to my goddaughters about my dolls. I want to reflect something that I think that they should be able to connect with, even if they're asking for skincare products and they're 7. I just moving on. And then what kind of issues or problems do you want to tackle when you come up with a doll story? And again, this doesn't have to be like some big societal issue, although sometimes you absolutely can. I mean, again, World by Us is how I started with a lot of my dolls and thinking about a lot of my dolls. So they were kind of like, I want to talk about, this social problem or this aspect of identity that isn't really explored. That doesn't have to be an issue or a problem that you tackle. Some of my dolls have, like, okay, so Indy and Lily right back there. Let me just grab them. So Indy and Lily, their conflict is, so they're foster sisters. Indy is fostered and ultimately adopted into Lily's family. And their central conflict, at least on paper, is over the cat. Because Lily has had this cat. It's her cat. It likes her better than her older brother and sister. And that's really important to her. And then Indy comes along and the cat starts liking Indy better. And that creates like a whole central conflict and insecurity that develops between these two. And that's part of their story. It's not the entirety of their story, but that's like, the struggles of how to merge a family together and the tensions and insecurities that arise from that was something that I wanted to explore with these doll stories. Like, is it solving world hunger? No, it's not. But it's still, an interesting thing to tell. And I think that's actually really important. When it comes to doll stories, when you're thinking about storytelling in general, conflict is always really important. There has to be some sort of conflict to move the story along, unless you're doing some weird lit fic thing where you're just doing like meandering thoughts from your protagonist. You do you, you do you. But having a conflict helps drive a story. And so coming up with some source of tension in your doll's story can actually really help develop personalities and story a lot further than you would think. Obviously, it'd be great if they lived just absolutely perfect lives and nothing ever went wrong. But isn't it more interesting to explore how do they react when something doesn't work out in their favor? Another thing that I find useful when I'm coming up with doll stories, especially if you've already come up with a story or a personality for one doll, is to consider what other stories and dolls and personalities you have in your collection and springboard from there. So what I mean by this is when I got Miri and Carnes, so Miri is artistic, she's in theater, and Carnes is more of a STEM person, but she's outdoors, like trying to dig for dinosaurs in an area that probably doesn't have dinosaurs in it. I live in Ohio. We don't have dinosaurs in our rock. Our rock is too young. I haven't set these girls specifically in Ohio, but I feel like that informs my feels. So I had Miri and Carnes. Oh, and then I added Indy and Lily, and Indy is an artist. She likes to paint and sketch and draw, and Lily is in choir, and she plays a little bit of volleyball, and she's on student council, but part of Lily's story is that she's really average at everything. She's not really, really amazing at anything, and she's in this family full of amazing people, and so she really struggles with that. So point being, I had all these dolls that were largely in the arts, or had a hobby that I personally connected very strongly with. In the case of Carnes and dinosaurs, love dinosaurs. And so when I added my 122, Najud, I wanted to add someone who didn't have something, who would bring something unique into my collection, bring a unique story into my collection. So obviously, Najud is Muslim, and that was something that she was bringing unique into my collection. But she's also my sports ball girly, one of them. I now have two. I do not play sports ball. The fact that I call it sports ball should tell you exactly how I feel about sports ball. I do not enjoy sports. I don't enjoy playing sports. I don't enjoy watching sports. The only exception is hockey. I do like hockey. I'm a Michigander. That's what we do in Michigan. So I really don't like sports, but I do recognize that sports are really important, a really important part of a lot of people's childhood and beyond. And I felt like it was neglectful of me to just ignore sports ball entirely as a story aspect, as a hobby, just because I don't personally enjoy sports. And so when I added Najud, I very specifically made her into someone who does sports. So she plays volleyball, she plays lacrosse. I did give her one of my hobbies, which is I used to fence. So she fences. My kingdom for a fencing set for 18-inch dolls. My kingdom. So, I did give her a little bit of me, but for the most part, I gave her a bunch of things that I didn't really understand or relate to because I knew it was important and it brought something different to my little doll world story. So I think that can sometimes be a helpful thing is, if you own, like, so let's say you have Girls of the Year and you are like, okay, I want to start adding like some stories for my Truly Me's. Maybe look at who you have as a Girl of the Year and like consider how you can make a doll that's different from that. It really does keep coming back to how to make something different or unique. At least for me, that is something that I care about. Another part of telling a doll's story is recognizing that sometimes the dolls are going to change their mind. So just like how, sometimes you pick out a name for a doll and then you like get the doll and you're like, oh no, this doll is not a whatever. She's actually a this. That happens with stories too. So Elena here, she's my number 43. She came to me and I had picked out her name before I even had her, before I even had like my sight on a 43. I saw a listing for one and I was like, oh, her name is Elena. So like sometimes also doll names in particular will just be like Thunderbolts. Like that is who she is. Elena was one of those for me. Like she had a name instantaneously. But I didn't really have a personality for her. I just started like picking out some hobbies. So originally she played the flute and she did karate. And then I got the doll, and as I was like playing with her and putting her into outfits and taking some photos with her, I did a photo of her where she was playing tag with some of my other dolls, and that kind of changed everything. Suddenly, instead of, I mean, she was always a 9-year-old. For me, Elena is 9. So I knew she was, a little younger feeling, but having her play tag really brought out this like really hyperactive, excitable part of her personality that I hadn't really planned on. And so the karate thing kind of fell by the wayside because I could imagine that her dads would put her into karate to try and channel some of her excess energy because she has a lot of energy. But instead I got her for whatever reason, she just suddenly was like, but I'm into astronomy. I really like looking at the stars. And so got her a little telescope set, and that was completely different than what I intended, but it just fit her. So she's this little hyperactive girl who is irrepressible and makes friends with people, even though some people don't want to be friends with her. They can't help but be friends with her because she's just so excited and so happy to see everyone and is magnetic, and people just love her. And that just kind of came about, even though that wasn't what I really intended for her. Sometimes you have to let the doll speak to you. And by that, I mean, I don't literally mean the doll speaks to you, although if they do for you, you do you. But sometimes you're just going to look at a doll and something is going to make sense for them that you hadn't really planned on. Or you're going to take a picture of them in an outfit that's going to change, what you think of their style should be. Or you're going to, like me, take a picture of them doing an activity that you didn't really think about. And suddenly that's a core tenet of who they are. Elena likes to play. She likes to play like general kids games. She likes to play with her neighbors. She likes to play outside. That's who Elena is. And so it's really important, if you are someone who's like just beginning to develop doll stories, to try new things with your dolls to see what fits and see what works. Sometimes a doll will come along and you put them in a box of their story and they fit. And that's perfect. You don't have to change anything. But you should be open to dolls wanting to do different things. That's also really useful too, because like maybe there's a play set or accessory set that you think is really cool personally, but you don't necessarily have planned for a story, and then you get it. See which dolls kind of resonate with it. See, feel free to add it in. There's nothing, you are not necessarily writing and publishing these stories. So there's nothing to say that it has to remain static. You can change it whenever you want. Here's one thing that I think is incredibly helpful to really make your dolls' worlds and stories feel very, very vibrant. And that is to make connections between your dolls. Don't have your doll have this single story that is theirs and it's all by themselves. Make sure that they have connections to some of your other dolls to help broaden their world and make them feel more alive and make their stories feel more alive. So, as an example, this is my number 58, Ariadne. And she is, for me, her big hobby and interest is she dreams of being a detective someday. She really, girl, your glasses are a little crooked. She dreams of being a detective someday. She's super into practicing her detective skills. She's obsessed with Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. She's really into chemistry and forensics and likes to explore those things. Like she has a special interest, and she clings to that special interest. And that is interesting in and of itself to me. But she gets more interesting when I put her with Zara, my 127. Zara has her own story. She loves bird watching. She does beekeeping. She likes to play board games. Yes, I actually did go with a bee hobby motif for this one. Don't ask me why. I just did. She is also dyslexic and has dyscalculia, and really, really struggles in school. Ariadne is very, very good in school. And so these two, in my story, Ariadne is 9, Zara is 12, but they actually meet because Ariadne has skipped a few grades and ends up becoming Zara's tutor at their community center, and helps Zara with some of her schoolwork. And part of their story is that Ariadne, because of her interest in becoming a detective, is always looking for crimes in the neighborhood and things that she can solve. And Zara here kind of becomes her Watson to an extent, ends up coming, following her and helping her with her little mysteries, kind of being the more realistic one to Ariadne's dreamer side. So on their own, their stories are interesting enough, but when I put them together, they have more, it's more fun when they have a connection together, because it opens the door for doll photography as well. Like, I had a really fun shoot with them a few months ago where I did like a little photo story of them solving a mystery together, a la children's mystery style. Like, there was no murder, there was no blood, it was a missing dog. But it helps to have these connections so that your dolls feel like real people who have friends, who might have rivalries. Najud, the doll that I showed earlier, is both best friends and big rivals with one of my other dolls because they compete on opposite sports teams. I've already said Lily and Indy have tension between them because of some of the changing family dynamics for both of them. It's interesting to give your dolls at least one other doll that they interact with or have a shared story with, just to kind of broaden things out for them. It just makes it more interesting, and it gives space for you to really tell a real story. A doll by herself with no one to interact with, that's a personality maybe, but it's not a story. When you give them someone else that they're interacting with, that's when it becomes a real story. One more thing I want to add in here before I kind of wrap this up with some final tips is when you're coming up with doll stories, it is important to be aware of stereotyping. I think it's really powerful to use your dolls in some ways as an educational tool for yourself by giving them backgrounds and histories that aren't like you. I think that's really important. I think it's an important empathy tool. That's why stories are so important. They help us develop empathy and see the world through different perspectives, right? So I think it's a good thing to give your dolls different backgrounds that aren't at all like you. But you need to do it in a way that doesn't devolve into stereotypes and is respectful of the people that you are trying to represent with your dolls. That doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. I have made mistakes. I have done not great research sometimes, or I've done some shortcuts where I should not have done shortcuts. It is okay that you're going to make mistakes. You just need to be aware of it. And so when you put a doll, if you make a doll with a different background, a different history, a different religion, a different ethnicity, a different whatever, just make sure you're doing some research. Your dolls can be a great way to learn more about the world because it gives you an in. Like it kind of pushes you in some ways to maybe look something up or learn something that you'd always kind of wanted to do, but you didn't really have a reason to do it. And so it just kept getting backburnered. Dolls are a really great way to get that sort of more into the foreground in your life, to learn more about these subjects because you want it to be part of your doll's story. You want to take pictures. Maybe you do want to write down and write a little book for yourself or to, publish or whatever you want to do, put on AO3. Maybe that is something that you want to do, but then you do need to take the time to research it. I think sometimes another thing you should do is if you ever look at a doll and their story just comes to you instantly, is then pause and ask yourself why it came to you instantly. There are sometimes when stereotypes can kind of build into that snap story that happens that we don't realize is a stereotype, at least not in our conscious brain. Unconsciously, we might be making those connections. So it's always good to, when you have a snap story, just pop into your head about, oh, this is who this doll is, to go, okay, but why? Why is that who this doll is? Why is that this doll's story? Now that you have all these general ideas about how you might get started with how to develop a doll story or a doll personality or a doll background, I think one of the things that's useful is to think about how you want to record that. Again, some people might be like, yes, I want to write basically a book or 2 books or 6 books or whatever for each of my dolls. And I think that's wonderful. I highly encourage that. That is a great way to explore what writing is like, to explore how to build a story, how to develop a character, and how to put yourself into a life that isn't your own. Highly recommend, encourage, go for it. However, I am a working adult who works a full-time job and has other hobbies and also just wants to play with my dolls sometimes, and I need to be with my partner at other times. I have family obligations. Like, there's stuff in my life that means that I am not writing an individual book or 2 or 6 for all of my, I don't know, like 17 Truly Me dolls or customized dolls, or, you know, my dolls that didn't come with a story. Like, I don't have time to write that. So what I do is I actually got this from Summer Solstice AG on YouTube. They actually did a video a while, like maybe a year ago, about like developing their dolls' personalities, and they had some tips that I would like to pass on to you. One of which I definitely use, one of which I don't. But it's really kind of up to you about what works for you. So Summer Solstice AG in her video showed this Google Doc that she kept where she had like the basic stats broken down for each of her dolls. And so I modified mine to include more of the things that I was interested in having on there. But like, I have their name, their age, their birth date. I do include what their zodiac and their birthstone is, just for funsies. That's not something I particularly care about, but I did throw it in there. And then I have like, you know, who are their parents, who are their extended family members, who lives with them, who are their siblings, do they have any pets, what's their favorite food, where do they go to school, what grade are they in, what's their favorite subject in school, what's their least favorite subject in school, do they have any disabilities, what is their religion, if any, what is their racial or ethnic background, what are their fears? And then I do a little thing like, what's their personality? And by that, I don't expect anyone to be able to just like fully write a personality. But I like to do it in the way that American Girl did at some point in their branding, where like they have 3 key words that kind of describe what a doll's personality is. So, you know, sarcastic, funny, proud, like, you know, I just pick 3 words that kind of are the keystone points of a doll's personality. And then I have a section for what are their connections to my other dolls. How do they know some of these other dolls? There's nobody in my collection who knows every single one of my dolls that I come up with a story for. No, that's not realistic for me. But I try and have at least 3 or 4 dolls that they have some point of connection to. So I have several dolls who are involved in theater in some way, either acting or in the tech theater side. I have some sports balls. I have some dolls who actually, I have Quinn, my number 62, actually met Carnes, my 112, in the hospital when they were, you know, there for separate issues. Like, they have some connections to help like create stories. Some of them have best friends. Ramona, my 54 over there, her best friend is Indy, because they're both really shy and they like art and they like the fact that they can be together without needing to talk all the time and be outgoing and sociable. They can just hang out in silence. So those are the kind of things that I put down onto my document. And then I usually have also like her story, which is, again, I don't write out the full story, but I write a couple of sentences basically about what is the central conflict and what is the central problem that they are trying to solve when I think about them. So Ramona there, her central conflict is that she's very, very shy and she has trouble making friends. And so she's trying to, her central story is about doing things that are outside of her comfort zone, to try something new, to kind of push her out of her box a little bit. Again, it doesn't always have to be super deep. Meanwhile, Viola, my number 26, her mother died in childbirth with her, and her older sister kind of resents her for that. And so she's kind of struggling with that. So like a little bit more deep. Olamide right there, her central conflict is that she is on the basketball team, and she is also a cheerleader, and she feels like she has to be two different people depending on which team she is with. That the cheerleaders, expect her to be one person, and her basketball teammates expect her to be another person, and she's feeling pulled in a lot of directions. So that's kind of like a medium serious kind of story. Like, again, they don't always have to be central conflicts, but I think conflict makes a story interesting and gives your doll's story a drive and gives your doll's personality a purpose. And I think that can be really helpful, is sometimes thinking about what is the purpose behind a doll's story, what is the purpose behind a doll's personality, because, oh, my doll's really nice. Cool. But like, why? Like, what has made her into this super nice person? Is there anything that forces her into not being nice? Like, what's the breaking point for her? Are there some people that she's not nice to? Like, your doll's nice, and I love that. That's wonderful. We need more kindness in the world. Is it hard for her to be kind? Is it easy? Like, was a value instilled in her by her family? Like, why? Give us a why behind these things, right? The why, the conflict, the tension, that's where a story really comes to life. So that's why I like to keep that document. Is it helps me remember, because I am also in my mid and pushing late 30s, and so I don't necessarily remember all these details all the time. Every single one of my dolls has parents or family members that all have names and all have occupations. I do not remember them off the top of my head. I keep a document. Another thing that Summer Solstice AG recommended in her video was Pinterest boards. So if you're someone who likes to come up with aesthetics and vibes, like, use a Pinterest board. I don't do that. It doesn't work for me, especially because I don't care about aesthetics, really, or fashion. I do have like a fashion sense for all of my dolls, but that just helps me figure out clothing choices for them a little bit easier. Like, there's some dolls that would not be caught dead in a dress, and there's other dolls that would not be caught dead in pants. It's a whole thing. So you can definitely include that, and maybe a Pinterest style board would help you with that. Another thing that you can do if you want to be like a little more old school and a little less tech is to get like a bullet journal or a blank journal or a drawing pad or something, and keep a couple of pages for each doll. Write in your thoughts, like paste in images, take pictures of your dolls when you have them in different outfits or doing different things, and put them into a book. Like, create an actual physical scrapbook. That's really nice too, because, nobody wants to have to like scroll back on their Instagram for 10,000 years to find this one photo from 3 years ago that they thought looked really good. If you put it in a scrapbook, you can look back on it and remember things without having to open your phone. And given that I'm personally in an era where I want less screen time and less time on social media, that is something that I'm actually exploring doing, is printing out doll photos and putting them into a book. If you're someone who does like Cricut stuff, I just got a Cricut, but it's like an old one that my mom just gave me. So it's like, I don't know what to do with it. I don't even know what a Cricut really is, other than lots of people with DIY and crafty things like to use Cricut. Maybe there's something you can do with your Cricut to bring in other ways to engage with your dolls that also support creating doll stories. So there's lots of options out there for you. And I can just say, I think the best thing to do is just get started. Like, start coming up with a story for one of your dolls. Just pick one. Pick one of your dolls and just say, I'm going to create a story for them. And it doesn't have to be set in stone. If you create a story and then at the end of the day you're like, yeah, I don't like it. It doesn't work for this doll. It's not clicking. It doesn't fit. It doesn't have to. Like, just the experience of trying to think in a creative way and thinking about your dolls in terms of a story, that can be an experience in and of itself, even if you don't want to like have to remember anything. You can come up with a new story every time. Maybe you have a doll that, you have a name for them, but maybe they have a different story every time. That's also something that you could do. That would be super fun. Nothing says that you come up with a doll story and then you're done. Like, I add things to my doll stories all the time. Anytime I get a new doll, I have to add more connections. So some of my dolls that I've had forever suddenly get a new friend as part of their story, or a new rival, or a new person in their school homeroom, because I've added a doll. So like, these characters can be dynamic. Their stories can be dynamic. And I think it's just fun. I think it's fun. If you're someone who has a lot of downtime where, you know, you don't have to be doing anything that requires a ton of focus, you know, if you ride the subway for work, or, you know, you like to go on walks around the neighborhood, or, you know, you just have some time where you're not actively needing to focus, this can be something that you do to have like a little mental fun time. You know, I have insomnia sometimes, and so I'll just lay in bed and think about doll stories and think about little scenes for my dolls. Like, it's just a thing that you can do that is a creative way to engage with your dolls and your hobby that isn't just, you know, buying stuff. It can be, you know, sometimes you got to buy stuff to support the doll story. At least that's what I tell myself when I'm like, oh, well, I need this item that I see on eBay for a decent price. Not because I'm tempted because of the decent price. Oh, no, it's because clearly one of my dolls, this is part of her hobby, right? Like, that's totally a thing. So it can support your desire to buy things, but it's also just something different and separate from the buying of things that gives you more time with your dolls, that helps you connect with your dolls, and gives you something to share with other collectors too, so that you can tell them a fun story. So yeah, that's how I kind of go about developing doll stories and some of the tricks and tips that I can think of. I could definitely answer questions if you have any in the comments, but I'd love to hear about some of your doll stories and how you've come up with stories for your dolls. I think that for me, hearing about the stories that people have for their dolls is one of my favorite parts of American Girl. Again, I grew up in the story-heavy era. That is, to me, the delight and joy of American Girl, is those stories. So please share your stories, what you've come up with for your dolls, any struggles that you've had, any questions that you have. I'm happy to chat in the comments. That's also one of the great parts about doing AGTube, is getting to know other people and getting to chat with them. Please like, comment, and subscribe should you so desire. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye!